Okay, so welcome everybody. It's April. I can't believe we've gotten this far in the year. Time does certainly fly, so I'm glad that everyone has taken time out of their schedules to be able to go ahead and join us. If we go to the next slide, we'll kind of go through the agenda. It's going to be a relatively light light session today in terms of the number of planned items, but I hope to have a fairly robust conversation when we get into the future of the TC section. So the idea here is that we'll go through our normal sets of updates and then have a more robust and substantive discussion around kind of what we all want to go ahead and do next. And I think that's the big focus for today. So if we go on to the next couple of slides here. I do want to go ahead. I don't believe Jane is able to go ahead and make the call today. However, this is her last official set of meetings as our longtime co-secretary of the TC. So again, thanking her for all of her years of service and leadership to the community. She's still part of the community. She is not leaving us by any stretch of the meetings of the word. So we will still get to go ahead and hear her insights and her wisdom. However, I do want to go ahead and big public thanks for all the work that she's done in the leadership area of our community.
If I may, Kelly, you're on the call. How long have you been TC co-secretary?
I started, I think, late summer, early fall last year.
So let's call it a year.
Roughly.
Ish. Is it like totally no work at all?
It's not totally no work. It's a few hours a month.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that's sharing it with Jane, right? Correct. Yes.
And Jane's done a lot, hasn't she?
Jane does a ton. Yes.
So what Rob just said about Jane recognizing her service as co-secretary, the fact of the matter is that for most of those years, Jane was doing it all by herself.
Correct.
And so let's recognize that. Now, I really wouldn't be happy to see all that fall on you, Kelly. I bet you probably would not either. Would you?
I would love some help.
Yeah? Well, now, how are we going to skin this cat? There's more than one way to skin a cat. I think we need some volunteer.
That sounds like an excellent segue to the next bullet point. And yes, all apparent cheesiness aside, this is, and we did not rehearse that. We're just kind of nerdy that way. We are looking for some help. I mean, so we've seen the and I think the biggest one here is Kelly does need some help here. We do run a number of different work groups, working sessions. We run the different meetings, and we require support in those areas. Kelly cannot do it all. As much as she is absolutely capable, we do need the assistance. So it is not a huge burden, but it is a good way to really understand all the different elements of what this TC does on a day in and day out basis, especially when it gets into the administrivia of working with OASIS and understanding the rules and bylaws. As we are shifting over to calendar events and public pages and all the like. So yeah, okay. Whoever is actually presenting, I don't know if you realize you switched to a different page or not. So. But anyway, Kelly, if you're the one presenting.
Just one second. No, I'm sorry, dude. It's me. I haven't done this in a while. Just a second.
Oh, never mind.
I was trying to record my attendance like adult. I forgot I was sharing the screen.
It's okay.
There it is. So we were on slide. Oh, we're going into YouTube, or we were still.
We're quite there yet. We're almost
okay.
done.
All right. Sorry, y'all. We definitely did not rehearse this, like Rob said. All right, let's go again. I won't do anything on my end. I'm not going to touch. I'm not going to sneeze.
There we go. So hey, we also looking for taxi. So if you are interested, let us know. Otherwise, we may just start to go ahead and voluntold people. and see where their interest is. But I much prefer organic, volunteering. Now we can go to the next slide. So this is the fun one. So I guess it's a welcome to YouTube. We're all YouTubers now. And I may have died a little bit on the inside saying that. But because we've been doing this, and been putting some stuff up, we actually worked with OASIS, and we actually have our own YouTube channel now. It is public. It's out there where we have all of our meetings available, at least through November of last year. Couple of different goals. One is we wanted to have a more permanent way of doing this, and I will absolutely go ahead and do this. And I'm actually going to put this link out in the into the listserv as well after the call today, Duncan. But if someone is able to go ahead and add that in while I'm talking, feel free. Not Trey, because you're sharing. But we do have the channel now. As you can see, it is an ugly URL. That's YouTube's rules. We need to get to 100 subscribers before we can get a vanity URL. So like every YouTuber out there, I need you to go out there, subscribe to the channel, smash that like button, ring the bell, do all those other fun things.
Hey,
Go
Rob,
ahead and get
should
us
we
over
make
100.
sock puppet accounts? Can we make sock puppet accounts?
As far as I'm concerned, sure.
So if any of the more hackerly oriented types want to script creating a bunch of sock puppet accounts to subscribe to the channel, Rob and I will look the other way.
Yeah. And the one thing will notice is that we have disabled comments on these videos for the moment, mostly because I don't think any of us want to go ahead and deal with YouTube comment spam. But until we get this, but one of the goals here is not only to make sure that we have a kind of a permanent repository for these where it's easy to go ahead and get to. We've got a single link where we can reference, but also because it's public, it'll start to go ahead and organically show up in YouTube search algorithms and the like. So definitely wanted to go ahead and make sure that everyone was aware of this. Welcome to the 2020s. We are now content creators. So there's that. If we jump to the next slide. So we are now going to go ahead and move over to Emily, and we'll talk about about where we are with STIX updates. Emily.
All right, thanks, Rob. The brevity of the slide in no way indicates, it does not represent how much work the working group is doing right now. We are heads down, working through many documents that MITRE has contributed. So we've gone through the opinion document, the sightings document, and right now we're heads down on the best practices document that Rich Piazza wrote. If you participated in the STIX working group, while we were developing the 2.1 spec, that a lot of times things were resolved by saying, oh, that doesn't belong in the spec, that belongs in a best practices document. Well, Rich has created that best practices document, and we're going through it right now and, understanding the content and, thinking about what a best practices document should look like. And so there is quite a significant amount of work going on right now. It's just for purposes of the TC meeting, right now it's all internal and we don't have a lot to kind of bring forward at this stage. But one piece of good news is that we have resolved the comments to the extensions definition policy, and it's now in effect. So Rich has raised his hand. So Rich, do you want to say some things?
I just wanted to make a comment about the best practices draft. I don't know when it's going to be on Google Docs. Emily and I are still working on it.
Later today, I think, Rich.
Okay. I want to make it very clear that these were the ideas that we came up with at MITRE and we discussed with our DHS sponsor. This is in no way complete. It's in no way perfect. I think there's a lot of ideas out there that aren't included. There's probably some ideas in there that don't make sense. So I plead with you to review it and add as many comments and ideas as you can.
Well said.
That's very well said. Thank you, Rich. So we have another couple of raised hands. Now, Duncan, you wanted to say a few words?
Yeah, I was just gonna ask a question. You mentioned the Google Docs. Is the plan to eventually move it from Google Docs to a GitHub repo to put it under some sort of change control? Over.
So we don't have a plan like that currently in place. For future versions of the spec, that's certainly an idea. For this best practices document, we'll probably continue working it as we've historically worked documents through Google Docs, which does retain, revision history. So you can go back and view the previous comments and previous revisions. Okay. I don't see any more raised hands, but if anybody else has a question or comment, feel free. And back to the extensions definition policy, it's now in effect. So if you have extensions that you want to propose for future versions of the spec, please go and read through the policy document and submit a pull request to the Common Objects repository. And we've had some volunteers to be maintainers for the Common Objects repository. And if you want to participate in operationalizing the extensions definition policy, please volunteer to be a maintainer as well. We'd love to have more people involved in that side of the house. And with that said, Rob, back to you.
All right, thanks. Moving ahead, I believe the next on the agenda is Interop. So Marlon or Kartikey, take it away.
Thanks, Rob. Next slide, please. Yeah, so congratulations to the TC. The Taxi 2.1 Interop ballot passed. And so now there's a committee specification draft out there, and we're just waiting for it to get published officially. But for anyone that doesn't know, this is the interoperability test document committee specification to supplement the Taxi 2.1 OASIS standard. So anyways, a lot of good work went into this over quite a bit of over a long time. So really glad to see that the TC passed this, and we're looking forward to seeing how it works out during the Plug Fest. Next slide, please. So speaking of an update on the Plug Fest. So our last meeting was April 14th, so last week, and next meeting will be next week. Right now we have 3 participating organizations. So MITRE, Peraton, and Fujitsu. I believe there are a few more organizations that have expressed interest so far, but I'm waiting to hear back from them. If there's anyone else, so there's still some time before the Plug Fest. So if you're still thinking about it or interested, feel free to reach out to Marlon or I if you have any questions or whatnot, because there's still time to join. As far as the Plug Fest goes, so on the STIX side of things, STIX Interop, out of the personas identified, so far we have the malware analysis system, SIEM, STIX producer, STIX consumer, and TIP, and all at the level 2 interoperabilities. And then out of the 21 total use cases within STIX Interop, at least 18 of them are covered by these personas. So we have a lot of good coverage there, but we're always looking for more. So if anyone else wants to join, then feel free. On the Taxi Interop side of things, both personas, the Taxi server, Taxi client, both of those have been identified. So the participating organizations will be supporting those. But of course, we can always use more. Dates will be 15th through 17th of June of this year. And Peraton has agreed to sponsor that. So there'll be a virtual and in-person component. The in-person component will be here in the DC metro area in America at Peraton facilities. So again, thanks to Peraton for sponsoring this. Next slide, please. So on the STIX interop front, these 4 personas are have yet to be claimed by anyone. So if anyone sees any of these personas and thinks that they correspond to a product or service that they offer, then feel free to reach out to Marlon or I and to get involved with the Plug Fest. Next slide, please. Yep. So if you're interested in joining the Plug Fest, go ahead and provide your email address in the chat, or then send something to the mailing list, or directly to Marlon or I. Next slide, please. And then just a quick recap of where the Interop subcommittee is. So the Taxi 2.1 interoperability test document committee specification, that the ballot passed for that. And in case anyone is new, the STIX 2.1 interoperability committee specification that was passed late last year. So we're good on the STIX and taxi front. Plugfest next session is next Thursday, April 28th at 9 p.m. Eastern. Again, if you're interested and want to join that meeting even, then let us know and we can forward that invite to you. And then there's the STIX preferred website, which we're going to working on updating and figuring out workflows and such. Yep. Next slide, please. Well, all right, back to you, Rob. Thanks.
All right, so I do want to go ahead and thank you guys for the update there. It says Plugfest and moving on is a great thing. It says, and I will say that there is starting to get some buzz around STIX preferred within industry as part of my preparations for participating in a panel at the upcoming HISAC conference, which is actually in a few weeks. There is significant interest in what STIX preferred will go ahead and look like, because that's something that they can easily point their members to as to say, hey, here's implementations that are out there, either open source, commercial, what have you, that meet the interoperability standards that we've set out, and provides levels of confidence in the ability for organizations to be able to go ahead and use these tools and know that it'll work with others. So there's definitely a lot of interest out there. So I want to give you guys that feedback, so you know that that we, as we continue this work, that it is being noticed by members of the community. All right. So if we go on to the next slide, Trey. So this is an area where I kind of want to go ahead and spend the bulk of our time here. So back in the October-ish timeframe, about a month or so after I came on as co-chair, we needed to go through basically kind of a minor update to the charter of our TC to comply with some new OASIS rules, basically in recharting. And what we had decided to do at that time was to defer the real big picture discussion. We didn't want to go ahead and do a full recharter because at that point we thought it was going to be fairly disruptive, and cause a lot of folks to be able to go ahead and drop off the rosters, go ahead and re-come into the rosters. And given that we had a lot of momentum around trying to go ahead and get STIX and taxi to the 2.1 full OASIS standard status, I mean, that was a big drive for us. However, here we are in April of 2022. And when we look back at our charter, we look back at our charter, says, I think we've largely accomplished the goals that we set out in the original charter. And so really the question that is in front of us now is what's next? And I think, based off of, admittedly informal feedback, input from you all and others in the community, our next major goals are going to be around interop accessibility. And these really aren't called out in our current charter. So when we talk about STIX and taxi, and I think there's actually reference to SciBox in there, which has actually been rolled into STIX, but interop isn't part of the charter. So we also have a backlog of work to continue that. So we know that we've got additional cyber observables that need to be brought in, which could be extensions, they could be new SDOs. There's work on patterning that needs to be done. Software bill of materials is out there. So there's a number of things we want to go ahead and do. So really kind of want to figure out, well, what's next? What does this look like? Next slide. as this has been ongoing, it says, the other thing that we've noticed, and there's data to show, it says we've seen a significant drop off in attendance and participation month to month. If we look here at kind of who's on the call today, as I just kind of scroll over, got 23 people on the call right now. I think there's over 130 that are actually on the roster. So it is, we are, it's a subset of the overall membership.
I think it's probably down about a third from last year consistently.
Yeah. And I think there's a couple of reasons for that. It says, one is, as I know before, says, we're largely complete. The STIX and TAXI specs are, full OASIS global standards. And that was a huge accomplishment for us. And so I think a lot of folks are kind of resting a little bit, is probably the best way to go ahead and put it. And I think, acknowledgement, we all have day jobs, and most of us aren't compensated directly for doing this work. I mean, we do this, for the community as a whole. It's an important thing. So what we want to start having a conversation around is, how do we go ahead and recognize our updated purpose, what that is? How do we get more people involved in the TC and our work efforts? Diversity of thought and opinion is really crucial to the long-term success of what we're doing as a community. And while I think we have some very solid experts in the TC that are working day in and day out, there are many other voices that aren't being heard right now. And I think we need to go ahead and pull those in. And how do we go ahead and do that? One of the thoughts we had is, as a TC, the co-chairs meet on a roughly bi-weekly basis. And one of the thoughts that we had around there was, how about the creation of an exploratory committee to really define a vision statement for what the TC will be doing going forward, and proposing potentially a new charter for the TC. We are asking for volunteers to work on this effort, and we'd like to see results brought back to the TC in about 90 days. So give us 3 months. And so maybe by the end of summer, we can actually go ahead and kind of report out on what this group has done. Trey?
Just a crazy question, but is there any reason why we need to have just one group? Or could it not be that there starts to be a call, say there's a working call on this, and then a couple of camps might emerge, and then there might be a couple of proposals that we look at together. I don't think we need to necessarily constrain ourselves. Have a rule that it's just one that is the output. It could be that we have 2 or 3. That'd be great.
Yeah, I don't have any issues
really with that. If you want to get far out and future focused and think about all the ontology on the blockchain with lasers, go for it. Get strategic as you want to. If this is the place for that, right?
Yeah. So I would say, if you have interest in doing this, if you have thoughts, definitely go ahead and reach out to Trey or myself over the course of the next week or so, and let us know. Otherwise, I think, we have a few individuals in mind, and we may kind of reach out and kind of volunteer some people, says, hey, will you work on this? And so I'd like to see it organically happen. I think, that shows there, but we will reach out to some folks if we don't get kind of a good, critical mass around this. And Duncan, I see you, I hear you, and I am happy to go ahead and tag you. So thank you for that, sir. All right. Any questions or comments on this? All right. Here.
Now, don't make me start calling on folks. Oh, there we go.
Yeah, Duncan.
So again, I'll say what I said in the chat. Don't assume we need to have 100 people at every meeting. The fact that we used to in the early days is great, but the group has done great work, and we should feel proud of it. And yes, there's still more work to do, and yes, we need to do more in awareness and adoption. I don't disagree with any of that, but don't apologize, I guess, for that's what I'm saying. There are TCs that have 5 members. This is still a huge TC compared to almost all of them. And to Trey's point, yes, we can recharter and even have, we can even split if you think that's the right answer, and go into more than one. But don't assume we have to do that either. It is sort of a big deal to recharter. And so it turned, I know OpenC2 sort of went through a similar kind of discussion, and we're nowhere near as far along, but we did sort of reorganize and restructure. We did away with our subcommittee stuff, and we did that without rechartering. So there is, the group should take into account not just rechartering, which yes, maybe you should do, but it may just be, you don't need to recharter, you just need to change some of the, there's a fairly specific line you need to cross to require a recharter, and you can sort of stay on the less than recharter and still almost write everything you're doing, as long as you're sticking, as long as you're not expanding the scope. If you expand the scope, you need a recharter. If you reorganize, if you downsize, if you we're already done, we just want to maintain it.
Thank you. We've been through all this in painstaking detail with OASIS staff and are aware of this. But the decision was taken that a recharter is necessary. For example, interoperability is not in our charter, and yet is there a more significant area of activity? And per OASIS rules, just to add the interoperability activities to our charter would require a recharter. And Richard Struz and I, back before he stepped down, we spent a lot of time trying to have some far-sighted discussions around this, and felt that the community would be ready for this after we shipped 2.1. And let me be clear though, I was not suggesting that the TC would split and have multiple TCs with multiple charters. I was saying this exploratory committee could come back with a couple of different proposed changes for charters. I'm not at all advocating that we split up the TC. Yeah, Duncan?
Yeah, I don't want to Philadelphia lawyer it, and we can do it offline, but I think you just said we're not allowed to pass the interop spec, and I don't think that's a good thing to say on a recorded call.
I didn't say we're not allowed to pass the interop spec. I'm saying though that the interoperability subcommittee doesn't exist in terms of the TC's charter.
True, and that's my point. And again, you got different answers than I got, because OpenC2 did not recharter, and we did change our committee structure. So committees are within the, if you're not changing the scope, you're just, or at least they let us do it. So we don't have to solve it here. I'm just saying.
Okay, but it's not a question of,
functions.
look, it's not that Rob and I want there to be 200 people on a TC call. I mean, it was 23 when we started talking about this. We lost somebody along the way. Sorry, this may be boring. It's not about that. It's about having fresh blood and fresh ideas, and having new people on the call.
Agree. I don't agree with it. I'm just saying, just don't assume.
If our community isn't growing, then it's on life support mode or it's dying. And so there's a war going on, and there's a pandemic going on, and there's my day job stuff doesn't give me a whole lot of time on this. Rob, do you have infinity time for this? You don't, right? Does anybody on this call have infinity time?
I wish I did. So I think what I'm hearing is that there are options, and I think what we're really trying to go ahead and get at here is, one is we want to go ahead and see what our options are. So and it may be a recharter, it may not be a recharter. I prefer to not have to go ahead and jump through a lot of hoops if we can accomplish the same goals without getting there. So I think that is but I think the purpose of this committee is to figure out kind of, most important, kind of a vision statement. It's what do we really want to be able to go ahead and do, and let's figure out how to go ahead and do that within the confines of the rules that bind us, so to speak, and understand also that hey, we will work with staff to go ahead and figure out kind of where those boundaries are, what's shiftable, what's not. I mean, that's
the rules can be changed.
Exactly.
And I've been talking with the OASIS board, and they're quite amenable to the idea of changing some rules. So we can have a little bit of vision here and make this community into what we want it to be.
Yeah. So
or the best version that we can make it be.
we are really figuring out what comes next. So with that, like I said, I don't want to belabor points on this. I think there's there's a lot of discussion, and the goal here is to start go ahead and pulling in more people from the community, right? And reading through comments and stuff like that, that's the whole point. What do we want to go ahead and do? Let's report back and let's see what happens. So I now have another name that I'm going to go ahead and call on. And Sean says, and if there's interest here, says, absolutely, I'm happy to have you go ahead and step up, work with Duncan and others to go ahead and figure out kind of what is next. So let's go to the next slide, and we'll talk more about kind of some things here. Oops, back one. So, yeah, so there we go. So one of the things that we've done is and thought is, and again, this is a notional concept. I mean, we have committed to absolutely nothing that's on this slide. And one of the thoughts we had is that, there is a perception that we are North American centric. And it's mostly from like kind of the origins of the standards, the original folks that have played here. We've gotten to be more global, but I think we can do a lot better. And so there are some, I think, loose-ish OASIS rules around having only 2 co-chairs. But we want to see if there are things we can go ahead and do better. So as an example, things to explore is, maybe we look at a more global focus. Maybe we have multiple regions where we can actually start to have more organic conversations within a region. Definitely better time zone coverage for meetings, to be able to go ahead and encourage our European colleagues or our Asia Pacific colleagues to be able to go ahead and do things at not so odd hours. So those are things we do, and maybe some sort of a community manager to help to organize things. So instead of necessarily secretaries, maybe it's more of a community manager for a region that can go ahead and coordinate things.
And also maybe, there's some of those questions, procedural questions, where somebody might want to like raise it up to Chet, but where within the TC leadership, we have that sort of institutional knowledge, but certain people are in certain time zones. The idea would be to cross-train these sort of regional co-chairs, so that within that scope of time zones, there would be at least 1 or 2 people who, if there was a working group, ad hoc working group that was organizing around working on some extension or piece of work or whatever, that there would be somebody in their time zone who should be awake and on Slack, who they could ping if there was some kind of OASIS question, for example. Does that make sense?
It does, and I think as Trey and I were talking recently, one of the areas that we think about is it's also it's just like we have to go ahead and do in our day jobs, succession planning and disaster planning. Because I was on a call with a client of mine talking about disaster recovery and business continuity. If for example, Trey and I were, hit by a bus tomorrow, which I don't wish on anybody. What happens with the TC?
Particularly the bus driver, that would be awful for them.
So what happens next? I mean, and I don't think we have good answers, but I also think that, that has caused us to think more about kind of, who do we have in the wings? Who else is there that will be able to go ahead and step up and carry the TC forward? It could very well be that, my day job changes tomorrow and I need to go ahead and do something else. I mean, those real life things happen. Yeah. Duncan.
So both on the previous topic of awareness adoption and on this topic of, in other words, trying to get more people involved, and on this topic of hey, we should have a more global focus. Somebody made a point earlier about, hey, we're done. We're actually not done. We have an OASIS standard. We have in the past in other OASIS standards made them ITU standards, which does increase your visibility quite a lot because it gets translated into 8 other languages as part of the answer to that. We've had that as a goal since like literally day 1 of this organization. I've asked in the past for creating a liaison to get sent to Study Group 17 to do that. They want to do it. We've, I think, passed all the hurdles to do it, other than we need to send that liaison. Could we possibly agree to do that and get somebody to do that? It's sort of a weird process through OASIS. We have to agree to do it, and then Jamie has to send it.
But we've been holding off on submitting to the ITU until we had more interoperability testing and real world reports for whether the STIX 2.1 extension mechanism is really working or not. That's too important for the future of the standard to then submit to the ITU and have to make backward breaking changes. So it's very intentional that we have not yet submitted to the ITU.
So you have,
And that's a decision that we could discuss perhaps as an agenda topic on next month's meeting.
do you have a, because I have to tell the ITU whatever, do you have a time frame where you think you might get to that? Because previously everybody said when it was standard, which you have done.
Okay, so we have, and by we, I mean Rob, because he has done all the work on this because I'm just a lazy get. We have an agenda we need to get through, Duncan. And so I move that we
Okay,
have.
I think it'll do more for international than anything else, but it's your call.
Believe me, I'm cocked at, yes, big fan. Let's have this as a topic or on next month's call and go through it.
Just remember that's 3 months running that you go back and read the recordings. I bring it up, you say we'll do it next month. Just at some point we have to actually have the decision and talk about it. Over.
Yeah. Okay.
Thank you.
No,
Okay.
it is good. It's actually, and that'll, there's something on the next slide that will play into that as well. And I want to understand it because I don't have a full understanding yet. So if we jump to the next slide, Trey. One of the things that we'd had, so and this is, I think, where we kind of get to this. I mean, so it's about continuing forward momentum, right? So Duncan, to your point is, we're not done. I think there's more things that we know we want to get into the standard, either as part of the standard full on or through the extensions mechanism. We know that OASIS approval rules can be a challenge, and when we factor in the ITU, that becomes an additional hurdle. I don't want to call it a challenge necessarily yet because I don't know enough. But for example, when we think about other platforms, say for example like MISP is a good example that goes with a kind of a minor release cadence, not necessarily a major release cadence, but a minor release cadence, and maybe it's on a 6-month cycle. Where we're adding functionality, we're not introducing any breaking changes. One is showing that we're able to go ahead and continually to add things and do that and maintain a pace like that. What does that do for for in the larger standards and stuff like that? It goes, once we say, hey, that STIX 2.1 is now an ITU standard. If we add stuff to it, what does that change? What does it mean? I believe there are answers to that. I just don't know them yet. So I'm happy to go ahead and learn. And that's one of those areas, but I mean, I want to go ahead and get a sense for this because I think, this, when we start factoring out, goes a long way to kind of figure out, kind of who we are next. Does that make sense to folks?
It makes sense to me, but then it sounds like an echo chamber. So, shall I go down and start calling on people, Rob, or what do you think?
Yeah. So,
Oops,
yeah, I mean,
sorry.
like the goal here is Patrick. Yeah, I was just looking at your name, Pat. So,
Okay,
Thank you, Pat.
first, hey everybody, I want to keep this
Hey.
general for this conversation, but somebody mentioned a topic near and dear to many of our hearts, ontology. So how would we litigate whether or not we want to add that to the charter without going through all the work required to fully describe it? Can we get kind of a go-no decision, pending, of course, what it gets submitted? But and I don't want to litigate the whole thing up here. I'm just trying to raise an example of something that many of us are afraid to bring things forward just based on the fact that we're expecting to get stomped on. And we're not going to put a lot of work into it unless we've got some hope of being successful, at least in terms of getting on the table. So that's a general conversation. And there may be other things like that. I use that as an example, not something we need to decide here today. But there are folks like us that are really willing to go in and do a lot of work in very specific areas that aren't currently in the charter. Another thing I'd like to suggest is a positive suggestion that ties into interoperability and also ties into MISP. You just mentioned MISP. Well, STIX is kind of a, it's lightly supported. The old version 1.1.2 and 2.1 are lightly supported within MISP, but that would be a great place for us to circle the wagon, so to speak, bring the folks from Circle and bring community stakeholders together. And let's get STIX really working in a given platform like MISP. And there could be other platforms out there that people would want to adopt. We would be more than happy to pick up a shovel and work towards improving the integration of STIX data into MISP and the production of STIX formatted data. That would be a second idea.
Having an open source reference platform, a la like Bind for DNS or something, would be phenomenal. And Pat, to your point about ontology, I mean, you and I have been working on this stuff for 10 years or something, and there's been this arguments about timestamps and this and that. But I would be the if so on ontology stuff. The thing for me is I've seen so much of what's currently fielded and sold that would make CSV look good. For me, it's always been like, we need to crawl, walk, run. Now, where we are with STIX 2.1 and the graph model, I feel like we're getting to a place to start running. And if like, I think if there was a committee that wanted to look at alternative serializations for STIX aside from JSON, fully, I'd second that. And if there was a committee that wanted to stand up and start looking at how do we do ontology and stuff, like great, like, because we needed to crawl and walk and now let's run.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
don't want to shout anybody down.
Yeah, Trey, I wasn't, again, I'm not trying to relitigate old friction points or whatever you want to call them. I'm just trying to just highlight the point that there's a lot of us out here with a bunch of shovels willing to dig some holes, maybe different holes than we've been focused on. Number one, and number two, I'd really like to see us see if, as part of the committee's work, engage the folks from Circle. Let's get STIX treated like a first-class citizen as a mission. So maybe that's a working group. Some of the stuff we wouldn't really, I don't think, Emily, fit within the cadence of the working group structure. So we need to get time. Anyway, we could discuss all that. That's two areas that I'd be interested in.
It sure would. It sure would help interoperability if we had a good reference platform. And that whole idea we've talked about of having like the STIX labs and taxi labs to have it a la SSL labs for interoperability testing, having a good reference platform, maybe that should be a work product that the committee undertakes to support in some way. But that would be something that we would need to probably put into a new charter. It'd be a new direction to go in. And then same for the ontological stuff. Ryan,
Yeah, and the advantage,
sorry.
The advantage of codifying it in the charter will hopefully filter out, if there's strong objections to an idea, whatever that idea may be.
Yeah. So I think Rich Piazza had his hand up first, and then we'll get to Ryan. So Rich.
I just wanted to mention that MITRE is doing some work with Circle on compatibility between MISP and STIX. I saw that Christian is on the call, and I know he's been working on that with some of the people on our team. So there is some beginnings there. I just wanted to point that out.
That is great to hear. And if you've kind of looking at the cadence of some of this community development corners over the last several months, some of it's opportunistic, but there's also kind of a methods of madness, if you will, as we start to go ahead and see now that we are at a point where we are with the standards, there are more things we can go ahead and do. And so, for example, with the work that Ryan and Chris Link presented on last month, goes a long way. So Ryan, you have your hand up. And if you're speaking, you're on mute.
Yeah, no, I was seeking out the unmute button. So the threat actor context technical committee is gaining traction, momentum. We're finding that we might be one of those implementations that's extending STIX towards the semantic technologies. And so would be happy to be involved in discussions about how ontologies and knowledge bases that incorporate the STIX standard unfold, because the interest in semantic graph analytics is growing significantly right now. Institutions are building their data-centric models around ontological constructs, and that gives us an opportunity to plug the STIX specification right into their data models. So we're having success, and I think that an integration or a conversation between the two technical committees, this is the time to have that conversation.
So Ryan, is that something that you would be prepared to sort of take, I don't know, 15 or 20 minutes or something like that on next month's call and put together a little agenda, maybe run it by me and Rob and whatever, so we can coordinate and let's start having that discussion. Rob, how do you feel about that?
Yeah, I mean, I think it builds on the work that Ryan presented last month.
Yeah.
I would be happy to do that.
So great.
Right. I love
Thanks.
knocking agenda items off for the next meeting too. That's also, it's like two birds with one stone.
So because we're running a little bit short on time, and also because I have diarrhea of the mouth, how we've talked for a long time about like, STIX 2.1, and like we can't publicly start working on STIX 2.2 because then that'll send market signals, and then folks who are midway through implementing 2.1 will stop, and product managers are going to put it in their backlog. Y'all remember all this talk, right? So our
I may have been guilty of that talk.
Yeah, no, our friends over at Circle. Hand wave around, some environments don't let you just install any software. All right. So one of the things that the MIST folks learned a long time ago, they got version 2.4 approved in, let's say, a defense environment. And the policy there for change control was like, if it was a minor release, then they never had to do another sort of loop-de-loop through the change control formalities. And so like MISP is on 2.4.159 or 158, I forget, and probably will only ever be 2.4. Infinity. And so we were thinking, so a couple of things. We've also had near infinity conversations on release scoping and whether we try to do it by time or by functionality, and wasted a lot of committee time on that. So one of the things that Rob and I were spitballing is, what if we said finger to the wind, as long as we don't get to some really truly breaking change, maybe the ontological stuff needs to be a 2.2 or a 3.0, but that we could start just putting out a quarterly release or a half yearly release, and maybe it would just be an errata release. Maybe it would be a release that adds functionality and a bunch of new SEOs that graduated from being extensions. But then there would be a cadence and a sort of, I think it would lend a drive to the work, that it wouldn't be like, yeah, okay, well, I have this great idea for an extension that might be in the standard one day, but I know the TC isn't going to do another release of STIX for 5 years. If instead I knew that the TC was going to do a release of STIX every quarter, then I would have a little bit more race to try to get my thing done and polished up and submitted. It'd be a little bit more of an interesting, I think, sort of collaborative development environment if we were doing regular releases. And so that's one thing. And then the separate thing is, how do y'all feel about the idea of just iterating on 2.1 with point releases as long as we can?
Jeff?
Jeff.
As long as we can push extensions, I'm wonderful with that.
Okay.
I think it works really well. There isn't too much on 2.1 that I, have a desperate urge to backwards breaking change. So yeah.
Yeah, and I think that's really the important thing is, and as Marlon notes in chat, it says it depends on scope of change, right? And we have to be, I think we need to be, I want to say willful about how we do things. But the important thing is that in order to be able to go ahead and accomplish this, we have to make sure that we're not doing any back breaking changes, because that becomes a challenge. But these are all things that I think we go through and we start having more substantive conversations around. I am very heartened to go ahead and see, the notes of support in the chat. That's exactly what we wanted to go ahead and accomplish today. And there are things from newer names to me, which is, I also think is a good thing, because that means that this is starting to go ahead and resonate. So you will see more more of this as we come through. Trey and I will be reaching out to some individuals to go ahead and help kind of start up look this exploratory committee, and also the other areas that we brought up here. So with that, there's a couple minutes left here. I do want to be respectful of everyone's time. Are there any issues that we haven't covered? Rich, I see you have your hand up.
Sorry. Yes, I just wanted to mention, as Emily mentioned, there was the extension write-up that's out there. And what I tried to do when I wrote that was make a more formal process. And I think, based on what Trey is saying, if we want to have, several releases a year, I think there has to be some management on the TC's behalf. I don't know who would do it. I know Emily mentioned that there'd be maintainers of the GitHub site, but more like the plan to say, okay, we're going to have a release in the fall, and these 4 extensions are planned to be in there. And that's sort of, everybody sort of knows that, and it's quote unquote approved by the TC, or at least the TC doesn't have any objections. So there's a little bit of that in the document, and I think that formalizing that a little bit would really go a long way.
Good point. Thank you. Anyone else? I see Sean.
Sean, you got that. All right.
Yeah. Yeah. It's okay, Sean. So yeah, we're basically getting on the agenda for this formal call for agenda. We really haven't had a formal call for agenda items. And I think that maybe that's part of the issue. Remains to be seen. But if there's anything that people want to do, absolutely, you go ahead and reach out to any of us, and there's myself, Trey, or any of the others, and we can go ahead and get those incorporated into making them more formal agenda items. It's so that's how I would answer that at the moment. And if we need to make it something a little bit more formal, that's something we can do as well. Yes, yeah, and I will commit right now that IT will be on the agenda for next month.
And like, we're doing the best we can. Rob and I are super crazy busy, and all the other TC leadership. If we were living our best lives, we'd be sending out a proposed agenda and a call for agenda items and stuff. But if you've got stuff, help us. Just email it to us or email it to the list and say, hey, proposed agenda item, a little bit of comment for background. If that works, but never feel shy about wanting something on the agenda. This is your community, not ours. I mean, it's ours too, but it's all of ours.
Yeah.
Pat, you had something?
I just wanted to validate, there was some conversation about these TC meetings going quarterly. I just want to validate that we're currently sticking on the monthly cadence.
Yes.
For now, yes.
Yep. And I agree. Let's get some folks with shovels. Let's get some stuff. Let's do some stuff.
I don't want to use the phrase shovel ready, but I think we've got a few of those projects.
It's an analogy I've been using for quite some time. It's as old as Roxanante, who you can see behind me there.
Oh, we're gonna start tilting at windmills now too. Oh, there we go.
Oh, that's anyway, don't get me started. Hey, you guys want to talk about timestamps? Hey, by the way, very quickly, Trey, I've got the
Yes,
answer to
sir.
timestamps. I just reread Frederick Pohl's Gateway series. And in that, he talks about meet time and machine time. So that's been our problem. We've been conflating meet time and machine time all these years.
Oh, clearly. Thank you
Okay,
so
so now we
much.
can call it meet time. Millisecond is more than enough precision for meet time.
Oh, good. Yeah, I mean, like
Boom, boom.
when I'm grilling, I usually like second precision on my flipping. You know, it's the best I can manage. But you're a better man than I, in many respects.
All right.
Anyway,
With
With
that,
that,
I'm going to go ahead and bring this meeting to a close. Thank you all for your inputs. As Coach said, do record your attendance. I will strive to go ahead and get this recording up for folks in the next few days. We'll repeat this again tonight for our Asia Pacific friends who are able to go ahead and make it, and we'll see you all next month. Thank you, everybody.
Hey, can I ask everybody a favor before you go? Take 5.5 seconds after you get off this call and write a thank you email to Jane for her service. Just one sentence. Make her day. Thanks, y'all.
All right.